Death's Door, an extract from the anthology Ultimate Shades of Horror by John Wing. The occupied rowing boat gently undulated on a calm azure sea beneath a captivating blue, cloudless sky. The sun had reached its zenith, harshly penetrating its rays upon the solitary individual. That person was Jason Gray. In the blink of an eye, as soon as he had walked through the door, he found himself stranded in the middle of an ocean with no visible sign of land. It took him a few minutes to come to terms with his predicament, mystified how he came to be where he was, when only a moment ago he had been in an empty room. It didn't make sense. Everything he touched, including himself, was solid. It was definitely real. How he came to be suddenly here, he had no idea, but here he was. Accepting his situation, he picked up a blue rucksack by his feet and inspected its contents. In the two outside pockets were flasks, both containing water. Inside he discovered there was food: sandwiches, chicken with salad, crisps, 3 bananas and 2 apples and 2 bars of chocolate, though in this heat they were sure to melt. He unwrapped one of them and devoured it quickly, washing it down with water. The only non-food item was a flick knife, which he put in his trouser pocket. He saw the 2 oars in their cradle, but where would he row to? There was nothing but ocean as far as the eye could see. He had no idea in which direction he should go. There was no sign of life anywhere. No birds overhead, no ship near or far. The only sound, the gentle lapping of waves on the side of his boat. The intense heat pressed down on him like a heavy weight. There was no breeze for relief. He undid a couple of buttons on the top of his shirt and dabbed some water around his neck. It brought him only marginal respite. As he wiped sweat from his forehead, he happened to gaze out at the water a few feet from the boat. He thought he saw something, some vague shadow that quickly came and went. He stared hard at the place where he thought he saw it. Nothing. He convinced himself he had imagined it. The heat was getting to him. He took another drink. As he brought the flask down from his lips, he saw movement again. There was something there. He hadn't imagined it. In fact, there were now 2 eerie shapes moving quickly below the surface. They appeared to be quite large. Just then, a fin sliced through the water. It just as quickly disappeared. That's when Jason became uncomfortable and somewhat apprehensive. It hadn't occurred to him until now. He'd been preoccupied with his circumstance and he hadn't given any thought to his fear. But now he had seen a fin. His one fear came rushing to him. Jason Gray was afraid of sharks. Ever since seeing the film Jaws when he was 8, watching half hid behind a cushion, sat next to his 11-year-old brother, he'd been scared of these creatures. He had countless nightmares after that. The scene where the decapitated head suddenly appeared in the sunken boat's hull always terrified him. Usually, when he had these unsettling dreams, it was his head he saw floating in the murky depths. Yet for all his fears of these dangerous predators, he had a morbid fascination of them. He wanted to know all about sharks, so he read books, surfed the internet, coming across disturbing images of shark attacks, which of course instilled an even greater dread in him. But it was the great white shark, as portrayed in the film, that he wanted to learn about the most. Soon he knew just about everything to do with sharks, especially the great white. He learnt that it was a ferocious hunter with 3,000 teeth, that its underbelly is only white whereas its top surface is grey to blue-grey, ideal for hunting its prey because as it strikes from below, the greyish top coloration blends in with the dark water, meaning it can usually approach its intended victim unobserved. They weigh about 5,000 pounds with a length of 12 to 16 feet long. He learnt that they don't chew their food, but swallow whole from morsels that they rip from their quarry. Yes, Jason Gray feared sharks, but his knowledge of them was extensive. And here he sat in a small boat, feeling very helpless and vulnerable upon a vast ocean beneath an unforgiving sun. Surely I'm safe, he reasoned to himself. No way am I going in. If there are sharks, they'll just swim away. He inspected the water closer. He couldn't see any sign of them. If there had been one, he concluded it had gone. His anxiety eased considerably. He felt hungry. He unwrapped the cellophane from the chicken sandwich and ate it gladly. It tasted good, just what he needed. As he put the last bit in his mouth, he heard something to his right. He quickly looked and saw disappearing under the sea a dorsal fin and part of a tail. He hadn't imagined it. There had been a shark lurking nearby. His anxiety increased. He furtively scanned the calm waters. He could see nothing, but he knew that didn't mean anything. Then he saw it, about 100 feet from where he floated, but to his utter dismay, he saw two of them. What made him even more nervous was that they were great whites. They were huge. He judged them to be at least 20 feet long. All his anxiety came tumbling back to him from when he was a child. Every photograph he had looked at of sharks mauling their prey came clearly upon his conscience. The dismembered human body parts, the deluge of blood, a shark's cavernous mouth displaying its deadly triangular, serrated, razor-sharp teeth. All of this froze him to the bone. What could he do? What could he do? He was as helpless as a fly caught in a spider's web. There was no way of escape. But wait, he muttered to himself. They don't know I'm here, do they? It's just a boat floating on water. If I keep perfectly still, they'll just go away. Yes, they will. This rationale assured his nerves somewhat. He didn't dare move a muscle. The sun still raged angrily upon the man in the boat on the still, calm sea, alone, with no sight of another ship miles from land. He could have been the last human on Earth. That's how it felt to Jason Gray as he pondered his predicament, wishing he was anywhere but here. He was thirsty. He had to have a drink. Ever so slowly, ever so carefully, he gently removed the flask from its pocket, bringing the container to his lips. He took a long, big gulp, with some of it dribbling down the side of his chin. He splattered some on his face. As he screwed the lid back on, he saw a dark shape heading towards him. Like a torpedo that had been fired from an unsuspecting submarine, the ominous object was making a direct beeline for him. Fast, silently, smoothly, it targeted his boat. Jason gripped the sides, staring wide-eyed at the oncoming threat that he knew he couldn't do anything about. Any second now, it would smash right into him. 1, 2, 3. Contact. Nothing. At the last moment, the shark had swum underneath him. The boat jolted madly as if it was being shaken by a giant's invisible hand. He gripped even harder to the sides for fear of falling overboard. But he was safe. He thanked God. Sweat poured down his face like drops of melted ice from a stalactite, his heart beating with the rapidity of a train's pistons. But nothing had happened. He breathed out heavily, relieved and hopeful that his ordeal was now truly over. He had faced his phobia, and that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. Coming from the same direction as the first, the second shark propelled itself straight for Jason. His brain went into overdrive, trying frantically to come up with a solution. But there was nothing he could do. He was at the mercy of the predator. He looked at the oars. Maybe, he thought, maybe. He grabbed hold of the right one and lifted it up as he stood precariously, the oar vertical to the water, both hands firmly wrapped around the wood. Any second now, his fate would be decided. Closer and closer it came. Jason's fear was screaming inside his mind like 1,000 demented voices. How he kept a lid on it, he didn't know. Perhaps it was the urge to survive, that whatever the threat to one's existence, you do absolutely anything, no matter how ridiculous or implausible it may seem, to overcome the peril. The great white was only feet away. Somehow Jason sensed that this one was not going to dive. He was right. With all the strength he could muster, at the last possible moment, inches only away from impact, Jason lunged the oar down with a raucous yell, thumping it into the snout. The shark vanished below the boat, thrashing wildly. Jason lost his balance, falling down, losing the oar in the process to the sea, hitting his head on the seat while the boat rocked about like a roller coaster ride taking a precipitous corner at speed. Water spilled into the boat, saturating Jason. Amazingly, he was still afloat. He was half submerged in water, with blood running down the side of his face. But he was alive. He raised himself up slowly, painfully, half cognizant. As he peered over the rim of his mega craft, he saw one of the sharks aiming for him again. This time, he knew he wasn't going to thwart its attempt of capsizing him. One instant, he was on top of the water. The next, he had been lifted high as he and his boat were pushed upward. The boat broke in two as he found himself cartwheeling in the air for what could have only been seconds, or what felt a lot longer, before he came crashing into the water, sinking below into a world of darkness, only to break its surface, spluttering and coughing. Treading water, his legs kicking wildly to stay above, he knew he couldn't remain above the waterline for long. Pieces of wood floated all about him, none of them substantial enough to aid in his predicament. Then he saw, not far from him, part of the boat intact, with its underbelly face up. He frantically made for it, his fear of the shark speeding his progress. He awkwardly heaved himself up with just the tips of his feet touching the water. He brought his legs up so he was almost curved into a ball. The position was uncomfortable, but at least none of his body touched the sea. Taking in the situation, he knew the odds weren't in his favour. Clinging desperately to a wrecked boat, no hint of a ship in sight, frying under the sun's detrimental rays, and two great whites surreptitiously swimming God knows where, Jason was living on borrowed time. His thoughts turned to his family, Eva, his beautiful wife, and Martha and Ruth, his 10 and 8-year-old daughters. Tears welled up in his eyes as he pictured them. He would never see them again. "I love you," he mumbled. "I love you." The tears streamed down his face. Through his blurred vision, he saw a shape not far from where he lay come into view. Then a second one. 2 dorsal fins cut through the water with the ease of a knife slicing through butter. They circled his prostrate form. "I love you, Eva," he cried. "I love you." One of the fins vanished as the other one continued to circle him. As he blubbered precariously on his makeshift raft, he saw the dark, menacing shadow approaching him. "Forgive me, Eva. Forgive me." Jason was catapulted into the air as if he had been fired from a cannon. Bits of wood shattered all about him as he went up, then down. As he descended, what he saw was not water, but a huge cavernous mouth, armed with deadly 3-inch serrated teeth, as the shark shot itself up out of the ocean to receive his fragile, helpless body. His inconsolable screams were instantly obliterated when the jaws of the great white snapped tight on his upper right thigh, like a shut door on a trapped finger. The pain, though fleeting, was unimaginably brutal. Such was the intensity of the agony, which can only be likened to shoving one's bare hand into a roaring fire, that Jason immediately lost consciousness. As Jason plummeted to the sea, his blood spurting in the air from the gaping wound where his right leg should have been, the shark swallowed his bleeding limb whole, diving back into the sea as it feasted on the human remain. When his bulk splashed into the water, blood pumping onto its surface, the other shark grabbed hold of the dead frame and tossed it up high as it would a seal, as if this frail human form was its plaything. Within 5 minutes, hardly a thing was left of the corpse of Jason Gray, as the sharks gorged themselves on his skin and bones. His blood was all that remained of what was his mortal life, and this soon dispersed under the raging sun. Jason Gray had failed to face his fear. If you're intrigued how this story continues, it is available to download from Amazon in my anthology, Ultimate Shades of Horror.